Okay, thanks for jumping on today's little call, the webinar, go-to meeting on the QMAMC versus the manual muscle test. I wanted to talk about these two things. I think there's some confusion that I see amongst practitioners, both that have attended the muscle system specialist and rethink courses about what the QMAMC is and is it really different than the manual muscle test. And if you've been following any of the Facebook threads on this, you can see some information about manual muscle testing being propagated. And just as a quick note, this particular document is not for general publication. It's only for specified distribution for this particular group. Two primary reasons there. One, I don't know if anyone else would really understand it who's not familiar with the content. And two, I haven't cited everything that's on this document in the usual accurate way. And so because it's not cited, I don't want it out there floating around. So if you have this document or you want me to send it to you, that's fine. Just keep it for your own personal use. Maybe it's going to turn into a more formal document and be made part of some of the materials that we distribute through the muscle system specialist courses and exercise pro ed. So with that said, let's dig in here, right? Quote by Gail Sheehy I thought was interesting and appropriate here, right? Mastery. What a profoundly satisfying feeling when one finally gets on top of a new set of skills, sees the light under the new door those skills can open, and even as another door is closing. And so I would tell you my own experience with manual muscle testing, the clinical kinesiology-based manual muscle testing chiropractic had developed and was used by another organization I was involved in for years. Definitely was a new set of skills and a new way of thinking about applying forces to the body and learn about anatomy and muscle function. But those skills and that door is closed for me professionally, just to let you know. It will not be a door that anything I'm involved in the future opens, as I'm going to try to build an argument for why what the QMAMC is fundamentally and functionally different than manual muscle testing as traditionally taught and understood by, again, any number of organizations. And two quotes I found amongst many I have on the subject regarding muscle function and trying to measure muscle capabilities. And you can see here the first page of Dr. Sikdar's book on ultrasound imaging to quantify muscle skeletal function. He states clearly that pathophysiologic mechanisms of many complex musculoskeletal problems remain poorly understood, in part because of the lack of robust measures to directly and concurrently quantify the multifactorial aspects of dynamic function of individual muscle tendon units in vivo. And since it's impossible to measure instantaneous muscle force in vivo, measurements of muscle strain, strain rate, instantaneous shortening, lengthening velocities using ultrasound can be used only as surrogate measurements. And I don't know if any of you are using ultrasound to generate surrogate measurements, but those two quotes underpin the notion that it is impossible to test in vivo skeletal muscle, anatomically named muscle, and its force output. Can't be done. So I thought so for a long time, and I thought wrong about that. But there is something to be said about this idea of putting your hands on somebody and pushing on them and kind of getting a sense of what's happening there. And so I went through and I found some various descriptions, if you will, of manual muscle testing and definitions, if you will. And you can see some of them here that for some reason, a lot of these use the idea of forces of gravity and movement related to forces of gravity. I'm not sure forces of gravity is plural, so not sure what that really means. And so they're talking about this idea about assessing strength of muscle against gravity and then against gravity with resistance, and somehow tying that to the manual aspect of it. I always thought that was a little strange. And you can see here some more quotes. Procedure for evaluating the function and strength of muscles and muscle groups, again with forces of gravity or against gravity. The one that you see next, using the manual muscle test, the hand of the clinician determines strength by sensing the force exerted when the patient moves their body part against gravity. And again, we've disproven that idea already just intuitively, right? That the only thing that a practitioner or a clinician can determine is their own strength. The only forces they can sense are their own forces, and there's no way using the hands can tell you anything about the other person's body and what's going on in it in terms of muscle force production. You can feel the torque your system produces. You cannot feel the torque necessarily as a direct process of the other person. And again, you can see here muscle testing attempts to determine contraction of a specific muscle, evaluating strengths of individual muscles or muscle groups, again against gravity, move against gravity, contraction of a muscle being tested, and so that's the background of some of the literature on the idea of manual muscle testing associated with the phrase and the test title, manual muscle test. Formal definitions really were hard to come by in the research that we did early on in the early muscle system consortia work and that course we developed on manual muscle testing, art and science. And in that manual, we went through a little word study and broke out the words manual muscle and test to try to figure out, well, if we just use the words and the individual definitions and put them together, what would we have? And when you combine these particular definitions, you'd have a procedure using the hands as a means of critical examination of the tissues that contract to produce movement in a body, to prove or disprove, to accept or reject its ability to do so. And even in this study, you get this idea that the phrase and the use of the word test has this notion of binariness, that it's good or bad or right or wrong or on or off or whatever it is. And so, this is, again, not possible in terms of interpreting what's going on when we do that. And so, 5 years ago, whenever we did this original study 4 years ago or something, we came up with a definition of what it would be like if you're going to do something like this, and we called it the qualitative manual assessment of motor control as a diverse set of processes, not a single set, for interpreting the quality of interactions via perturbation between an individual's unique motor control and a practitioner's hands and body, determined by that practitioner's physical and cognitive capabilities. And that didn't go far enough. And so I'm offering a modified definition of the QMAMC. This is going to be the definition of the QMAMC moving forward, minus any minor edits, revisions, syntax, sentence structure, and all the other stuff, as a diverse set of processes for initiating an interaction via perturbation between an individual's unique motor control system for a given configuration under specified conditions and a practitioner's hands and body and their unique motor control system, which reconciles the practitioner's subjective physical experience and their cognitive capabilities with the reported subjective physical experience and cognitive capabilities of the individual to reach a conclusion regarding the quality of that motor control expression. And so you can see here that we've excluded even this notion of against gravity and with gravity and all that stuff, because, again, that puts a constraint on the way you can actually set up this perturbation process. And I'm not going to get into all this the a priori science that informs that process and how we can even begin to say that we can address quality in that regard. But I wanted to make a distinction between, what a test is and what an assessment is, at least my take on it. And you'll probably find dictionary definitions that include the word test in the definition of assessment and the word assessment in the definition of the word test. But I wanted to at least make a distinction, for myself and, for those professionals who are looking at this particular subject, and that when looking at a test as a noun, as a pre-constructed thing, it's a critical examination, a procedure of submitting statements or such conditions or operations that lead, again, to proof or disproof or acceptance or rejection. And so that it's really about, I think, a test in my mind about a specific observation, about proving or disproving the presence or absence of something. And so tests do have that notion of yes or no, wrong or right. Whereas assessments are really, in this case, you can see the word judgment, right? They're making a judgment about something. And so it's a more general observation, and it's about information that's broad and contextual in order just to get a sense about whatever it is you are looking at or have an interest in. So, leveraging this idea into these traditional descriptions and uses of manual muscle testing, which are built around this idea that only the practitioner applying the force manually to the body with a focus on anatomically named muscles or small muscles groups determines the presence or absence or acceptance or rejection of the ability of the named muscles to generate force in the interaction for a specified scenario. So this idea that each targeted anatomically named muscle is tested under a specified posture and a set of conditions, and only those conditions. And tests have that quality to them. They're standardized. And so what manual muscle testing claims, again, which is impossible, is that you have to set up a particular posture and orientation of the body, and only that posture, and apply a force, and then somehow the force only is responded to by a specific anatomically named muscle or small group of muscles, and none other, and only the practitioner can decide how that went. And this gives this false notion that only those muscles should be considered in any final conclusion, and that process has an objective nature when only subjectivity is possible. And so this is the real confusion, I think, associated with manual muscle testing, is that an inherently subjective process, and we can talk about putting a hand dynamometer in your hand and getting a number from it, but even then the number is meaningless without some context. The process of manual muscle testing really isn't about motor control at all, and it's about testing specific muscle force, not torque. I've never seen any manual muscle testing description or definition ever talk about torque production, which is probably the only thing that we're feeling in our own bodies, and the only thing that the person that we're doing it to feels, right, is kind of the overall torque of the situation. And it assumes that there's only one way to test a muscle's force production. That's the way described by the test. Whereas in the QMAMC, any final judgment of subjectability to generate a reaction to the practitioner applying a force manually, which we call a perturbation, without necessarily a specific anatomically named muscle or group in mind. In fact, I would tell you right now that the process is always done with the idea that the whole body must generate a reaction. The entire system is always involved in the reaction process. And so in the QMAMC, the conclusion of both the subject's experience, what they report and about their own bodily experience, and the practitioner's bodily experience and cognitive descriptions of that, and the words chosen to do it, are what are used to make a conclusion about what's happening there. And so with the QMAMC, the practitioner and subject can set up any number of scenarios that we call configurations to gather information about the ability of the subject to react and control their body, even if you're trying to emphasize a particular segment or region. And so the QMAMC is not limited by, the testing idea of fixed reference conditions, and only those conditions will produce the scenario under which we can make a conclusion about an anatomically named muscle's function. The QMAMC throws that out the window, that idea, and gives a much broader and wider usage of the idea of a person pushing on somebody else. And so the QMAMC embraces the subjective nature of the manual application of force by the hands and actually moves to increase the subjectivity and amount of subjective information generated, because the manual muscle test is not subjective enough. We are embracing the notion of the subjectivity. If anything, we're being the most honest practitioners about this process and recognizing that as much as people want to turn it into and make it seem like an objective, quantified type test scenario, it simply is not and never can be. And so if it's subjective, well, then let's make it subjective and use that subjective information the way it can be used in decision making. And so we're looking at quality because we're talking about subjectiveness and character and inherent features. And there's a couple of definitions here of what quality is and how that works, and how quality is just a pragmatic, again, interpretation. And you have specification qualities and conformance qualities and deciding if something was produced correctly. But I like this last definition here where it says service quality is a comparison of expectations about a service with performance. And I think that fits what we're doing, because as practitioners, whatever your background is, you have an expectation about what's going to happen when you push on somebody somewhere on a limb or trunk segment, and what that performance might be. And even the subject, your client, has some expectations about how that might work. And so we are talking about an overall performance process that's built on initial expectations and then a reconciliation to those expectations following the event by both the practitioner and the subject. And even when you look in the literature about what quantifies criteria-wise, I mean, what qualifies criteria-wise as a qualitative analysis, the first criteria is the researcher serves as the instrument for data collection. So that puts us in qualitative land immediately, not quantitative land. And number three, helps us keep it there, right? That this process is looking for meaning and context and understanding and perception, and that it's empirical, and it's descriptive and exploratory and complex and broad, and helps define uniqueness for an individual's, the two individuals in this dance called the qualitative manual assessment of motor control. And so we're clearly on the qualitative subjective side. We embrace that and all of its benefits and limitations. And so there clearly are great benefits to this idea of looking at the system qualitatively and the practitioner using their hands as the force application process. And so what's great about this concept is the practitioner can apply the point of force in a wide variety of locations on the body. They can dynamically vary the magnitude during the interaction. They can alter direction moment to moment during the interaction. They alter the pathway of the force moment to moment. They can terminate the force in almost a nearly instantaneous period of time for safety, whereas many machines and apparati cannot. The person has to grapple with unloading the load many times, and that leaves itself to some risk in managing load. So the practitioner can apply a force to an infinite number of body configurations and segments to get a sense of control, not what individual muscles are necessarily doing. Their subjective experience and data can be included in decision making and conclusion, and this fits into a couple of different decision science and rational decision making models, including expected utility theory, which includes the subjective of the stakeholder and the decision maker in the final decision, because that's really what we're talking about, is the decision process, and the subject's subjective experience. And it's a social transaction in many cases, right? In that it helps build trust because it's a relatively intimate thing when you're inside someone's personal space and physically touching them. And the practitioner over time learns about their subject's unique motor control system, and the subjective experience of their own body can serve to inform decision making. And it's like dancing with a dance partner for the first time, as you guys kind of feel how each of you move. And we use the analysis or the analogy in the case of Adam, who is a jiu-jitsu black belt, high-level practitioner. And when he's grappling with somebody, how does he know what to do? How does he know where to move and how to move and what directions he should go? What's he picking up on when he's gripping somebody's gi, or he's got his elbow around some body part and he's trying to figure out what to do, and he's waiting for them to twitch or relax or change the way they're using their own body in the directions of force, and then he moves. And so it's very much in line with that idea, and it's quite useful for practitioners in that particular setting. Now, clearly there are limitations to this process. Because there's not a measurand with numerical value and units, objectivity is gone. And so accuracy, precision, and repeatability trial to trial is suspect. I mean, I know I can tell the difference between a 5-pound dumbbell and a 10-pound dumbbell in my hand, but I can't tell the difference necessarily between a 5-pound dumbbell and a 6-pound dumbbell in my hand under some situations, or maybe even a 5-pound dumbbell and a 7.2-pound dumbbell. I may not be able to pick that off. So we're clearly trading something off here for all the benefits. We can't make any absolute claims about the outcome of these interactions because of the inability to account for all the variables and measure them. Because so many are impinging on the interaction, because it's a gross aggregate response of both the individual and the practitioner's unique systems. Cognitive competency and creativity of the practitioner to even choose configurations and force application locations might be limited by those two things. And the physical competency and skill to create and control force vectors influence the interaction. So there's a limitation there. Body awareness of the subject could be low, and they might not be able to communicate very well with verbal language what their subjective experience is. Their own understanding as a subject and comprehension of the process could influence the way it goes. Fallacious cognitive biases can influence setup of the action and conclusions of the action. Physical touch of location and amount of contact surface, broad hand, pokey hand, grippy hand, squeezy hand, and pressures associated with that can influence interpretation and motor response. And of course, the magnitude of force application has a ceiling for everybody, and it's based on the practitioner's capabilities. And so, this makes applying the QMAMC to muscle groups with large cross sections like knee extensors and hip extensors difficult, because you may not see a quality issue because you can't produce enough of force in your own body to apply it to the system to even get a sense of quality in response. And so you might get false positives, which means you can't detect or pick up on a quality issue. Now, these quality...
Hey, Greg.
Yeah.
Greg. Quick question.
Yeah.
That has to do with this. I just thought about it when you were talking. If you, you're a big guy, right? If you have an older woman, let's say, right, would you give her more mechanical advantage in that scenario, by testing closer to a joint? Or have you ever thought about that? Or are you ready to do that?
Absolutely. If I feel like, hey, man, I don't know if I can down-regulate my own force production, the weight of my own arm might be problematic. Those are all great things that you get to modify based on your own knowledge and expertise of physics and statics and mechanics. So, yeah, I love it. It's absolutely the point. And the QMAMC you can use a variety of magnitudes. Not this idea of a fixed magnitude to only determine a muscle's ability is just ridiculous, because muscles have abilities across link tension, across their own force angle or moment to the joint. It's crazy, right? How many things to be taken in here. So you can alter your force for any scenario that you're in, and still start to build a picture of quality as you go. And quality can be improving along a continuum, not a go, no go, binary, yay, yes, no, go, strong, weak, shut down, turned on process. Muscles, hopefully have, which is one of the things we're assessing, the ability to regulate their torque production and force tension development across a continuum. You want clients with, 0, first, second, third, fourth, fifth gears, not 0 and 5th turbocharged, right? And so you're hoping to see that they can gradate their own force as you learn to gradate your own force application. So very good point, Dom. Thanks for bringing that up. Because quality and qualitative observations give us information that quantitative information can't give. And it gives things about objects or processes that numerical values and units of measurement can't see. And so the interpretive process captures properties and characteristics that create, again, descriptions which support context and meaning for the human experience. I mean, I can look at a glass of fluid, water, oil, whatever you want to put in there, and it can have quantitative and qualitative values. I mean, volume, temperature, fluid density, we can quantify these things. However, wetness, emergent properties, slipperiness, hotness, these don't have quantitative value, but they might inform the observer of something important to know about the utility of the fluid for human use or consumption. Taste, visual appeal, texture, these don't have quantified values, but are critical to informing the human who's trying to make a decision about what's going to go on and whether they're going to drink it or not, right? And so this idea that qualitativeness or subjectiveness is inherently flawed and there's something wrong with it, and if you're working with it, you're an idiot, is ridiculous and totally unnecessary, and on the wrong side of the rationality of decision making, in my humble opinion. So again, we're going to be honest, though, and know that there are limitations here, and that without numerical values with known units, we can't subject this information to mathematical computation and analysis. So we don't get validity and statistical measures like p-values and effect sizes and kappas. We can't calculate them. So it's important not to treat qualitative observation as absolute fact that carries external and or internal validity. And so any decision making using qualitative information should be corroborated with other data points whenever possible, as most of the time what we do in the exercise and muscle system realm is a corroborative process, and we're building circumstantial cases about what we might do or not do. And so we just have to recognize this and know that what someone might call hot, someone else might call warm. What someone else might drink, someone else might not. What someone else might eat because they like the texture versus someone else who doesn't like the texture is all part of the process. But under no circumstance should absolute conclusions or claims be drawn. So, Reese Manchester, our friend and colleague, Charlie McMillan, posts on this extensively. He's been working diligently, gathering more information about the provenance and history of manual muscle testing. And he recently stated that, of course, the minute a practitioner places their hand on a participant, the manual muscle test has become subjective to the practitioner. As long as it's understood and perhaps combined with the subjective reporting of the participant, there may exist some benefit from this interaction. So he's acknowledging that. But then, of course, it would no longer fall under the category of a manual muscle test. In fact, manual muscle test is an errant misrepresentation, and as traditionally described, it doesn't. It can't test the subject's muscle and its individual force-producing capability. At best, it reflects a general interpreted quality of the entire body system motor response to the specific perturbation, to the configuration at the time of the perturbation, and under the conditions internally, externally at the time of force application. So, concluding that a specific anatomically named muscle has been isolated in the process is the only explanation for the outcome of the manual muscle testing process is unsubstantiated and unreasonable. Specific anatomically named muscles can be implicated, but the physics of the conditions have to be so specified. It's very, very difficult to do it. It's just difficult to defend this idea of cause and effect. And so context is key, a dynamic process, the subjective experience is reported. We have to recognize error is occurring. Most of the things that constitute the event can't be directly observed. And inclusion of the participants' experience are tantamount to reaching any conclusion. So, my conclusion again, professionally at this point, I've made it clear. I think manual muscle testing's history. It's not a viable way to think about what we do when we're using our hands. It should be tossed out completely, I believe, from practice. But that's my feelings and approach to it. Till I hear a more defensible argument and a rationale that'll turn me back around, it's not going to happen. So you'll never hear me use the term manual muscle testing except to talk about it in terms of its traditional historical usage and context. Anytime that I'm talking about it, any courses for Exercise Pro Ed, it's going to be the QMAMC under this particular description. So I just wanted to get that out so you guys understood at least where I was coming from, and give you a chance to respond or discuss that, or if you have any questions, I'm definitely open to that at this point. So anybody got anything? Comments, edits, revisions, disagreements, open to all of it. Mike. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, how this is a lot, and I like how you break it down and all. What would be a good way of basically making it more basic to explain the difference between the two? Because I'm having a hard time explaining that part of the QMAMCs to others, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's the same thing." Like, no, it's not.
Yeah, people still think it's a manual muscle test.
Yeah, they still think it's the same thing as a manual muscle test when you're trying to explain them. It's not.
Yeah, so it's not, it's only, they think so only because in a static picture it looks like it, right? Your hands on somebody. So there's two things. One, the QMAMC is not making any claim to individual muscles as far as cause and effect. Two, the QMAMC and the thinking and the way things are interpreted about the event are system-based ideas, and that we're evaluating system response, not individual response outside of that. So the only two things that they share is the visual imagery of somebody's hand on somebody's body. After that, nothing else is the same.
Love it. Thank you, man.
Yep. Anybody else got anything?
Well, I think the big thing, I don't know if I missed you saying this, is the interaction to me is what really sets it apart.
Yes.
Did you say that, or did I miss that?
Yeah, no, it's a social interaction. It's a dance. It's both parties get to provide input.
That to me, if anybody wanted to know a difference, to me that's the biggest difference. Because whenever I did a quote unquote muscle test, I never asked really, the person how they felt about it. And even if I did, it was just more of did that hurt or not. Not so much, well, how'd that feel? What kind of, what percentage of effort did you put into that? You know what I mean? I never took those things into consideration. I think that, to me, is the biggest differential between those two things, in my opinion.
Yep. And that, speaking to your question, Mike, I would agree, right? That it is, if anything, it's probably more about the practitioner or the subject than the practitioner, right? Because the only person that really matters here is the subject and what's going on, and so any final decision is a consensus decision between the practitioner and the subject. If you both liked the event and your expectations were met, we're saying the quality's good, and we've given you a big graph that shows all the stuff you've got to consider in terms of laterality and link tension and force velocity and complexity of the skill and attention, and all these things feed into it, which again is fundamentally different than the manual muscle test, which is only taking into a couple of conditions, for a conclusion we made. And if either party in this little dance doesn't like it, well then everything stops and a discussion has to occur. Like, what's happening here? How come I didn't like it? And how come you did? On both sides of it. And so we can't say quality's high if one of the people participating didn't like something about it, in terms of their physical experience. So, and reconciliation to their expectation, right? So good stuff. Anybody else have anything comment wise or questions or Mike?
Yeah. Under limitations, when you were talking about how trying to duplicate the same response and, obviously 0.2 pounds versus 0.8 pounds, can't really determine that. What if the subject is kind of obsessed with like, hey, I know it's not the same. I want it to be the same, or, they're having trouble gaining that higher quality. Because I've had that like with one person so far.
Sure. Again, now you're talking about, trying to reconcile your understanding of what they're saying and their own sense of how they calibrate their own capability. And so, you'll have to decide by sampling more and corroborating, whether there's something there that you haven't been able to detect. They might be able to detect their own body and say, I still don't like the way that feels, or I still think it's not as sharp. The acceleration, the amount of distance, I feel myself displacing when you push on me is more than I want. Absolutely, it may warrant some more investigation on your part. So, they can't either, right? I mean, there's been a ton of studies, on this, and it's very difficult to, depending on the force that's already on the system, make a clear and concise and precise interpretation of how much additional force is on the system. In fact, the more force that's on it, the harder it is to decide or detect when the force increases, right? So it's tough. That's why we corroborate and sample, because maybe they might give you a reason to say, let me look around here some more and set up some new configurations and make some adjustments to this, and I can find something that might help you. So it's a dance.
That's when I like to bust out the phase 2 stuff.
Absolutely. Have them move a different way, put them in a machine, try it in a different, slightly different configuration, a different point in the path. And maybe you can find something. I do that all the time, Mike, all the time. Now, if you don't think you can do it for them and they're just getting obsessive compulsive about it, you're going to have a little conversation with them. It's all part of the process. Is that helpful, Mike? Does that give some insight or some?
Yes, absolutely. I really appreciate it. It makes a lot of sense. It's all like what Dom said. It's all about interaction. You got to keep talking. You got to have a clear expectation on both parties. And then, like I said, trial and error. I don't know. I haven't taken the whole course, but like you said, phase 2. Like, hey, you know what? Let's go try on a machine. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, let's put you over here. I'll take my hands off of you. Maybe we can come up with something else. So with my hands not on you, and you can describe this. Here's an ankle weight, right? Here's a rubber tube or something. So absolutely, yeah. So it's part of the scientific process, in natural observation to see what the organism does in different conditions as well. So it's good.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anybody else got anything? Everybody's good? Steven, how you doing? Good?
I'm doing good. It's, I mean, I've seen some of this stuff before, and you've tweaked it a bit, and I think the way you've tweaked it adds some context and perspective. So yeah, I'm cool with it.
Yeah, and by no means, I am not discounting or saying quantification is irrelevant here. I don't get that message and tell anybody, Max says you don't need to quantify. I didn't say that. Quantification's fine, but you need context in order to make a number make any sense at all. I mean, for me to say, yeah, Xavier, this is 200 degrees Celsius. That's all the information you need. What are we talking about? Right? Numerical values for numerical values' sake is nonsense. So combining quantification with qualification is the best way to go. In fact, when you take the courses, I'll show you all the current stuff coming out in the research community about the need for more qualified and subjective information to balance what's being found in some of these rigorous, highly controlled laboratory-based experiments, right? That are almost impossible to generalize to the rest of the public. I mean, our clients are always N1 studies. So, good. Anything else, Andrew? You good?
I'm good, sir.
All right.
It makes sense. So I think the biggest takeaway is just communicate with your clients and always ask them, what's going on, and hopefully you and your client come to an agreement. Basically, I mean, is that kind of the simplistic form, the way to put it?
They're the only ones that can tell you about their body.
Right.
Right. I who that's it. So we got to talk to them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Try to interpret what they're saying. And whether we can help them or not, that's a different thing. You may run into something where you can't help that situation. You can't help change that sensation that they're reporting that they don't like or that they want to change. But you want to know about that. Those are things that might be undiagnosed disease and underlying dysfunction that you need a doctor to help you or another healthcare provider to help you figure that out. So, good stuff. All right, you guys, if nobody's got anything else, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, Mac.
All right, you
Thanks,
guys.
Mac. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg.
Yep.